And then once I'm finished with this facet, then I'll change my settings and I'll go to another one and another one and another one, and eventually I'm going to build the whole pattern that either creates the beautiful reflection from the bottom of the stone, or it creates the complex pattern that we see in the crown. My name is Justin Prim. I'm a gem cutter, originally from America, and I started cutting just a little bit over 10 years ago. So I went from San Francisco to Bangkok, and now here in Lyon, France, and gem cutting kind of all over the world. So lapidary is cutting stones, so that can mean a lot of different things. That can mean cabochons, that can mean carvings, that can mean beads, but mostly for us here it means faceting. So we're taking the rough stone, or else we're taking a stone that needs to be improved, and we're making the faceting pattern, we're cutting it, we're polishing it, and trying to bring out some beauty, some life, some color in the stone. And sometimes that means also cutting things to fit into a setting, or cutting things that the customer specifically needs us to do. You know, if they have a specific idea, then we can make that out of the stone. And so, you know, it takes a long time to learn how to take the stone, the rough stone, and look at it and understand, you know, what's inside, what's the clean part, where's the beautiful part, where's the color. But eventually we understand how to do this, and then it's just a matter of, you know, going on the machine and building the pattern, building the design, and trying to make something really beautiful. So originally I was introduced to the gemstone world through a friend in California. She took me to a show, a trade show, and I saw the faceted stone for the first time, and I was like, wow, you know, I really wanted to know how to cut something like that, you know, small, with a complicated pattern. And so I looked online, how do you learn how to facet a stone? How do you learn how to cut? And I got very lucky because there was like in America, we have these lapidary clubs. You know, you can join the club and someone will teach you how to cut, you know, for free, mostly for free. It's just a community experience, I guess. So I started to learn how to cut at this club, you know, cabochons, a little bit of carving, and then finally, after 2 years, I got to learn how to do the faceting. So already for 2 years, I was learning how to make the shapes, the cabs, and then finally I got to do the faceted stone. That's what I wanted to do, but I quickly realized that the teacher there, they were very basic. So I learned to do one stone, and then after 2 weeks, I said, okay, you know, two days in 2 weeks, I said, okay, thank you. I have to go much faster than this now. So I bought a machine on eBay, and I started to cut at home, you know, every day. Go to work, come home, facet the stone, learn how to do it, you know, practice, practice, practice. So finally, when I moved to Bangkok, a few months, or maybe less than 1 year later, I moved to Bangkok. I was still a beginner cutter. I knew how to cut the stone, but not that good. So then I did my gemology school because I wanted to learn how to understand the stones better. But it really wasn't until I got to Bangkok that I started to become a good cutter. I met Victoria, and then I met a few other people that were also training me and helping me to learn all of the things that I didn't know yet. And that's really whenever the journey started to really blossom, because then I started to learn very quickly, you know, learning how to make the shapes, how to make the better polish, how to do all the different designs that I needed to do. And really since then I've been growing and growing and growing, you know, traveling around the world, meeting people from France, from England, from Thailand, from Sri Lanka, and starting to learn techniques that I've incorporated into my own style now. But it was really learning from all these different people that really helped make me where I am today. Going into the history a little bit. So one of the things that I really got fixated on when I started to cut was the history. Because I read a book and it was, the history of faceting, but it was not a very good book. So I kind of took it upon myself to, I guess, to make a better book. And that's what I've been working on this research project for maybe 7 years now, really since I moved to Bangkok, exploring the history of gem cutting. So if we want to go back and look at how did gem cutting begin, we can go back. I mean, we can go back to the beginning of the human story, but probably we can go back to the ancient Egyptians, maybe 3,000 or 4,000 BC, and we start to see the cabochon, the first use of the cabochon. Before that, everything's just kind of flat wafers. If we look at Anglo-Saxon, Sutton Hoo, these early English or early European types of jewelry, it's just garnets flat. It's not really a pattern, it's just something to put into the gold. But when we look at the ancient Egyptians, we start to see the cabochons. And then when we look at Europe, I think France is probably the earliest European cutters. I think the earliest thing that I've seen is like 900 AD. There was already a guild in Paris. But I'm guessing they were just doing cabochon. And then when we get into the beginning of the Renaissance, this is the 14th century, 15th century, we're starting to see the earliest of the flat facets. So yeah, around that time we start to see cabochon turning into faceting, and then faceting becomes very, very popular, like in the 1500s, the 1600s, all the way until today. So it was really in the Renaissance time with the new technology, new styles, new understanding of mineralogy and optics, and starting to understand what is the crystal, how do we manipulate it to bring out color or to bring out sparkle. France has always been the pioneer of the European gemstone arts, as far as I can tell so far. As I said, the 900s in Paris, they were already cutting colored stones. And then I think, when we look at the story around Europe, England follows France, Switzerland follows France, Italy was doing something before France, but eventually they're following France as well. So France has always been pioneering the styles. So the early faceted stones were happening here. Some of the different machines that we see were invented here. Not all of them, but and then some of the ones that were invented in other places, France started to use them, and then from France they spread around. So France for us is a great place to be, because we feel like we're in the center of all this history and all of this technology evolution, and also the stylistic, the tastes are evolving from here. So I think, yeah, from around the medieval times, we see the trade of Europe really start to happen. I mean, of course, we can look back at the Silk Road. Things are coming in from Venice and then going all over Europe. And then the famous royal houses from, the Tudors and in France before the Revolution, and, the Habsburgs in Vienna and in Prague. All of these big jewelry buyers, the connoisseurs of the famous kings and queens of Europe, of course, they were the customers. So every place that we have a royal family, you're going to have a gem cutter, and then everyone has their own style. So as we look through the periods of time, and I think you show this a lot on your Instagram, when we look at some of these different historical jewelry pieces, we can see different tastes, different styles. And then when we look at the faceted stones specifically, we can see, maybe If you look at the Czech garnet, it's going to use a rose cut. If you look at a sapphire cut in Paris, it will look a certain way. A sapphire cut in London will look a little bit different. Maybe the table's a little bit different, or the faceting pattern is slightly different. So we start to get this specialization around Europe of these different styles and tastes, and really that continues on until today. I mean, we still see, the cutters of Paris have a specialty, the cutters of London have a specialty, cutters in Italy have a different specialty, and that those specializations really have been going on since medieval times. Originally, as we were saying, it starts with the cabochon, it goes to the faceted stone. And so if we want to look at the transition or the story that goes with that evolution, it really comes to the technology. At least that's the way that I look at it. If we think about medieval times or even the beginning of the Renaissance, you've got maybe somebody cranking a table, right? You've got a table with a crank in it, and then somebody's just doing that, making the cabochon by freehand. And then, and even before that, maybe in Germany, you've got these big wheels from the water power, and the guy's just making the shape by hand. But once we've developed this machine to be able to crank like that, that's when it starts to develop, because now you've got this guy and he can make a very simple shape. The table cut is the first one, four facets and the table, and he's just going to crank and hold it by the free hand. But then as the technology gets more complicated, we've got some tool now to hold this stick in our hand. So now we can control the angle, we can control the rotation, and so he's still hand cranking like that, and now he's got this thing in his hand that's holding the stick, and this is allowing the design to get more complicated. Now we can do the rose cut. Middle of the 1500s, we can do the rose cut. So this is the quadrant. So this was the new technology that came right around the beginning of the 1500s. So the first one we see is in Prague, but Paris had this at least by the beginning of the 1600s. And so now, instead of just, hold on. So when we're doing the cabochon, we just need the stick. And so you've got the guy, and he's probably just, he's cranking the wheel, so the wheel's turning over here, and he's just got the stick. But once we come to the point where we've got this, now the stick goes into this thing, and we can move it to have different angles. So it's holding the stick for us. It's still just the stick. This is still just the stick. But now, as he's cranking, he's got this thing in his hand, and he can pick it up and look at it and see what he's doing, and he can rotate inside of here. So this is helping him make a more complicated design. So once we have this is really what allows us to do the rose cut. Now in the 1500s, the rose cut is the most complicated design that we have at that time. We don't have brilliant cuts yet. We do have some step cuts, and then eventually this thing becomes more complicated. And this is a more modern version. So now we have like mini gears, and the angle thing is a little bit more complicated, but it's still just a way of holding the stick in our hand to have a control, right? It's all about just controlling the stone. So when we get this more complicated technology, when we get that more complicated technology, we can do more complicated things, and of course that evolves every 100 years. It seems we get a new machine from that quadrant. Then eventually we get to the jam peg. So when we start to talk about the jam peg, this is really where the French technology becomes really important. So this is the first generation of jam peg. So this would have been around the 1820 or so in the Jura. As far as we know, this was invented in the Jura. So then you still have the stick, it's the same stick that we had doing the cabochons, but now we can put the stick into one of these holes, and then that makes our angle. And so now we're still hand cranking that thing, and we can check out our stone, stick it in the hole, and this makes a very fast way of cutting a stone. You know, make an angle, cut it. So everybody in Europe had that. You know, England, Germany, the Czech cutters, and of course the Parisian cutters and the cutters in the Jura in France. So eventually this evolves into this, and it's still the same idea. The stick goes into a hole, but now the stick gets more evolved. We've got a gear on it. So the stick goes in here, and now we have this plate, and this allows the French cutters to quickly turn the stone and cut really, really quickly. And only France had this. England never got it. Germany never got it. This upgrade, you know, with this special stick. So the French cutters become really, really good and really, really fast at cutting, mass production. This is about the end of the 1800s here. So we're kind of in, we have brilliant cuts by this point. We have all the more complicated cuts because the technology is allowing us to cut more complicated cuts. And because of this, France becomes the #1 gem cutting center in the world for a time. Because they've got better technology than anybody else. And now today, when we look around the world, everybody uses this. You know, all the cutters in Bangkok use this. All the cutters in Colombia are using this for emeralds. The cutters in England and Germany are still using this one, but it's still a French machine. And then, yeah, Israel uses one like this. India uses one like this. So really, this technology has gone around the whole world. And now the whole world can cut really fast, complicated designs and do anything. And it's really, it comes down to the story of technology, and then of course the artists who are using it, and all the different ways that they can imagine, to make different patterns and get more and more complicated until today. So far we've only been talking about the colored stone cutters, and that's really for me my special interest, because I of course am a colored stone cutter, but of course we have the world of the diamond cutter, the diamond polisher, or the diamantaire, right? So the diamantaire, the lapidaire, these are the two sides of the gem cutting world, and really if we look at the story of diamond cutting and colored stone cutting, they've always been two separate things, right? Like we can go all the way back probably until the beginning of the faceting technology, which is probably the beginning of the 1400s. And sometime in that first generation, we have people that cut diamonds and then people that cut everything else. And at least by the middle of the 1500s, when the colored stone cutters have this thing, the diamond cutters have already developed this thing. So this is the tang. And it's essentially, it's the same idea, right? It's a way to hold the stone in your hand on the stick. So the colored stone cutter puts it on this wooden stick, but the diamantaire is going to put it on here. Now this is a more modern one, but the old ones, it would have just been a ball of lead, and they'd heat it up and stick the diamond in there, because the diamond gets so hot when you polish it that the colored stone technique won't work. So they need something big and heavy and industrial, because the diamond, of course, it's the hardest material on earth. So they need more heavy-duty tools, and that's where they get this thing. So this is pretty much what they looked like 100 years ago and 300 and probably 500 years ago. They have not really evolved that much. Today, they do look a little bit different, but people still use this one too for different steps. But the modern one, it looks like this, and so we've got kind of a way up here to like change the angle, and this thing can rotate around to be able to cut the diamond. Because it's so hard, it needs a special tool that the colored stone cutters don't need, and part of that is being able to rotate the diamond around on its face because of the directional hardness. But really, this is a pretty simple tool. It changes the angle a little bit. It pinches the diamond in here, so we don't need wax or glue or anything like that, because the diamond just gets too hot. So you need a mechanical grabber. And in this version, it's like almost like a drill bit chuck or something. You know, you can loosen this thing and put the diamond in there and tighten it. But the diamond technology hasn't really changed very much. I mean, these look very different, but they're really not that different. It's just a slightly more sophisticated way of, you know, with gears and controls. But really, the diamond and the colored stone, the difference is about the hardness of the stone. You know, the diamantaire is an expert on one stone. They know everything about the diamond. They look at the crystal of the diamond and they know all these different ways that the stone grows, and that makes the stone really hard on different ways. For me, I don't know anything about that. We don't really need to know all that. But so our handpiece isn't so different. I mean, this is the one that I use every day for my work. And I mean, you know, it's smaller, but it has the same thing. You know, I can change my angle. So I need to change the angle to be able to cut the different facets. I need to be able to turn it. And for them, you know, theirs can turn like this with, and there's a little gear here to be able to do it as well. And then I need to be able to kind of go up and down, which is, you know, on my machine, the handpiece goes up and down, so it can sit on there. Now, for the diamond cutter, it doesn't really work the same way. They just change the angle, and it essentially does the same thing. So, yeah, the diamond cutter needs a much heavier tool, a bigger handpiece. It's all metal. The disc that they're cutting on is much, much faster, and it's harder. It's iron. You know, for us, iron is too hard. We use copper and tin and lead. They're using iron and steel, you know, much harder metals. So really, it's just about going faster, a harder material, and the ability to handle the heat of polishing a diamond, where the sapphire and the emerald, they're not getting that hot. So we can just use wax, where they need like metal pinchers. But otherwise, it's a similar idea, but even today, diamond cutters are diamond cutters, colored stone cutters are colored stone cutters, and most of the time, they don't know each other. The communities don't overlap. You know, historically, the diamond cutter has been, you know, in the world of the Jewish diamond dealer, and you know that's a tradition inside of a different community, whereas the colored stone cutter has usually not been a Jewish descendant. It's a different community. So that's kind of interesting. But really today, anybody can be a diamond cutter or a colored stone cutter, but usually the training will be different, and of course the tools are different. So during the pandemic, we were locked down like everybody else, and I was working on some different projects, you know, going deeper and deeper into the history, but then also trying to look at the science of cutting, you know, cutting all of these different experimental, like science projects. So this is my pandemic project, my first pandemic project. I wanted to see what would happen if you cut the exact same synthetic spinel in every different style that the jewelry trade uses. I wanted to see, what does the cut actually do? What does it change? Does it matter which cut we use, or do they all look the same? And they don't all look the same. But so once I did this, I had all these designs that I had, you know, researched and drawn out and everything. And so that, for me, naturally turned into doing a book. So what the book is basically, it's that set as an instructional manual, essentially. So a picture of the stone, a little history behind the design, and then for the gem cutter, it's like, how do you actually cut that stone? What does it do? What is it good for? You know, looking at this set and just trying to figure out what is the science and the art behind cutting, and then how do you do it? And so the idea behind the book is, this is all of the cuts that all the jewelers typically buy. So if you're a cutter in America or France or Bangkok or anywhere else in the world and you don't know how to do the classic standard cuts, like this is kind of the encyclopedia now of how to do it. And the cool thing about this is, you know, when you go on the internet to as a cutter, you know, we can download all kinds of different designs to try, but they're not usually these classic ones. They're crazy, weird, fun, experimental, creative ones, but they're not always very good for the jewelry world. You know, the jewelry world is used to seeing certain kinds of designs and they want those designs and they're not necessarily looking for very complicated, modern, weird ones. Or sometimes those crazy, complicated new designs take too long. They're too complicated. You know, these are tested through hundreds of years. You can cut them quickly. They do beautiful reflections and color, and it's sort of become a standard now because they're good at, you know, they're good at the different things that they do. So I kind of just wanted to make a book for all the gem cutters out there to say, hey, if you want to cut stuff for the jewelry trade, this is how you do it. But then also for the jeweler, you know, or for the jewelry historian even, like, oh, this is what this cut's called. Maybe you've seen it in your, you know, I don't know, your Lalique piece from the 1890s. Oh, he used this stone, he used this, or whatever, you know. So for the jeweler, they could look at these different styles and say, okay, maybe I want to design a piece of jewelry around this idea. And then for the gem cutter, the other way around, maybe I want to cut a stone for the jeweler that looks like this, and this is what the jeweler's expecting. So that's kind of what it is. It's a bit of a teaching tool, it's a bit of a reference guide, and it's definitely a design book for gem cutters and for jewelers. And now we're working on the second one, which I think you're going to love it because it's the historical one. We're going to go back to 500 years ago and the beginning of faceting and see how the cuts evolve over time, how they get more complicated, and then also look at, again, you know, what are these historical cuts doing? Why were they so popular, you know, in the Tudor times or the Victorian times or whatever? And then how do we do them? Because now we've forgotten most of these old cuts. So we're looking at the old cuts and going into the museums and drawing them and, you know, going on the computer and modeling them. And soon, yeah, have a book to say, okay, here's how you can do all the historical cuts, or 50 historical cuts. So yeah, it's fun. Teaching has been pretty much in the middle of my world since I moved to Bangkok. Like as soon as I went to Thailand, I wanted to learn cutting from the Thai people that were there, and I thought, oh, this should be easy. There should be a school here. It's a, you know, Thailand is one of the biggest cutting centers of the world. So I thought, surely there's a school here that I can go and learn on the weekends when I'm not doing my gemology program. And I was really surprised to find that there was no school. I mean, no school that I could find, no school in English, or no school that was made for international people. So I quickly started to think about, okay, how can I start to teach people what I've learned and what I'm learning? And as I've learned more and more and more and had the opportunities of teaching, you know, first in Bangkok, then in America, and now here, and really traveling all over the world and teaching, it's become really, really important to me. You know, it's the central part of my business, but also of my passion. You know, because we're traveling around the world and we're collecting all these books and we're collecting all these diagrams and designs and techniques and tools, and it's extremely important to me that I'm not the last person that knows how to do this. You know, I'm going with the master cutters of all the different countries who are now, you know, 60, 70, 80, almost 90 years old in some places, and learning what they do, and then turning that into, you know, maybe a YouTube video or a book or a day of a lesson in our class to make sure that the old techniques are remembered and they're preserved and they're trained for the, you know, passed on to the new generation. And so sometimes that looks like a book, but also sometimes that looks like our school. And so, you know, 3 or 4 times a year, we're bringing students, whether that's in this space or a place in New York or before it was in Bangkok, and bringing students in and saying, okay, you don't know anything about gem cutting. We're going to teach you everything that you need to know in 2 weeks. You know, it's a boot camp. And then you go home and you practice and practice, practice. And then in a year, you're going to be ready to cut professionally, hopefully, you know, if somebody wants to do that. So it's been really, really important for me to because I've been so lucky to learn from, you know, amazing cutters like Victoria, or my Sri Lankan mentor that I had in Thailand, or some of the master cutters that I've met in Paris and London. I really want to take that special knowledge that's been given to me and then present it to whoever wants to receive it, you know, whether it's through a YouTube video or people that come and do our class. It's really important to me that we don't keep it secret like they did 100 years ago. You know, we cannot do that anymore, because now some of those old techniques are being lost, and some of the old cutters are retiring with no apprentices, and it's super sad, you know. So it's become my personal mission to make sure that that does not happen, and that we can preserve the information, document it, write it in books, but also keep the tradition alive through the classes, and make sure that every year there's new cutters being made, you know, through our help, I guess. So yeah, that's a deep passion project for me. So as I was saying, you know, we're doing this course in different places around the world. This year, it's Lyon in France, and then in New York in America. And so what we're doing is we're using this type of machine. So we were looking at this. So this is a Sri Lankan machine. I learned this from Sri Lankan cutters, and I just sort of decided that I really love this machine. Before, I was using this kind of American machine. That's how I was originally trained. But once I started to use the handpiece, I just decided that this was the better way, at least for me. But I think for my students as well, it's really easy to learn this machine. So 4 students come in at a time. So it's a very small class. We want it to be very intimate, very personal. And we want to have a lot of time with each student to make sure that they really get everything that we want them to learn. So they're going to come in for 2 weeks. It's a full day of learning every day, Monday to Friday for 2 weeks. They're going to cut 4 stones. And, you know, not surprisingly, the 4 stones that they're going to learn how to do are coming straight out of the books, because they're the essential stones that any gem cutter would need to know. So they're going to cut these 4 different designs. They're going to learn how to use the machine, and they're also going to get an understanding about what the gem cutting world looks like. You know, what are the cutters in France doing? What are the cutters in America doing? What are the cutters in England doing? So that when they leave the class, they don't just know how to cut a stone, but they know a little bit about the market, the different aspects of the gem trade. You know, like, okay, Switzerland, they're cutting for watches. You know, Thailand, they're cutting for a lot of the jewelry trade. Paris, they're cutting for the high-end brands, and, you know, really doing perfect recutting for these brands. And it's important to understand all these different components. So if I just teach you how to cut, well, that's great, but you won't know how to do the business side. You won't know that there's these different areas that specialize in different things, and where to get the rough, and how to do the recutting. You know, there's really a lot of different things that you have to know. So we're trying to present all of this information in 2 weeks, which is why we call it a boot camp. It's so much information, and people really get transformed in these 2 weeks. They come in potentially knowing nothing about cut, and they go home with a collection of stones that they've cut, and all of this new knowledge about how to look at rough, how to look at a stone to do recutting. And you know, it's so fun for us to watch the students 1, 2, 3. You know, now it's been 5 or 6 years since we've had the first students. And some of those first students have built businesses, or, you know, a jeweler now can do gem cutting, and they can put their stones in their own jewelry. And it's really fun for us to be able to see what they're doing, you know, a few years later. And it's quite incredible to see some of the new companies that people have started, because, you know, we showed them how to use this. So it's really cool. I think not everybody can be a gem cutter. I mean, physically anybody could do it, but you need a specific type of personality. Our days in this office are often quiet and meditative, because I'm sitting here at this machine all day. I'm looking at my stone, this very small object, and potentially very valuable object. So it's important that we're able to be in kind of a silent, creative mode. It's not a very, we don't move around very much. We don't talk very much. So there's a lot of time in the day where we're just very, very focused on these very specific patterns and getting all the things together and problem solving. It's a lot of problem solving because we have to get a great, beautiful stone. We have to keep the weight. We have to get a good polish. So there's a lot of skills that we have to have, which is where the training comes in. We need to learn the skills from the masters that came before us, but then we also have to be able to control ourselves, to not want to get up and talk and move around and go on our phones all day, because we need to work. So we have to be kind of like disciplined and sit here and do the good work. But then once we finish the stone, okay, we can celebrate because we can see how beautiful it is. So for us in our company, we also have to be able to take a good photo, because a lot of the sales work is through Instagram and YouTube and social media. So if we don't know how to take a good photo, then nobody can see what we're doing. And if we don't know how to cut the stone correctly, then okay, we don't want to take the photo. And then, of course, communication skills, because when we're not silently cutting the stone, we're emailing customers or talking on the phone to customers or going to the trade show and selling or demonstrating the machines or whatever we're doing. And then for me as a teacher, I also have to be able to communicate all of these ideas that I have in my head and try to figure out what is going to enable the student to learn the best. So there's quite a lot of different skills, and there's different rhythms to the day. Some days we're cutting all day, some days it's photos, some days it's emails, and then some days we're in Hong Kong or Bangkok or Gem Genève or the San Marie show or Tucson, selling and buying and talking to people. So that's kind of the most interesting thing, is how diverse the job is. But I think, yeah, the best gem cutter, they need to be able to be still and be really focused on the cutting. That's the most important thing. And then having the communication with your customer to, continuously update them on their orders, if that's what it is, or selling the stone. So there's a lot of different skills, but I think, yeah, just for the cutting part, understanding how the machine and how the cutting works, and then actually being disciplined enough to sit down every day and just make those stones happen. And then if you're in a place like France where there is a cutting industry here, for us in this office, we're running our own business. We have to do all these different jobs. But if you're I guess lucky enough to be able to find an apprenticeship that will turn into a job in one of the cutting houses that are typically going to be in Paris, then you don't have to deal with so many of these things. I know the cutters that I'm friends with in Paris, they don't want to go to the trade show because they want to stay in the studio and cut. They don't have to talk to all the customers because they can just really hyper focus on just the cutting part. And in some ways I kind of envy them, because I would love to be able to just sit here all day and cut and cut and cut and never have to talk to anybody. But at the same time, I kind of like doing the trade shows, and I like going and teaching my classes, and I like taking a break from the machine to take a photo or to post something on Instagram and see the to me, I love building the community. So posting a photo and then sharing it with the faceting community and saying, hey, do you like this one better, or do you like that one better? And then also talking to the customer. This kind of diverse thing, that works for my personality, but I also appreciate and yeah, as I said, sort of envy the cutters in the atelier that can just become the master of one thing and not have to worry about where's the money coming from or if is the customer happy. It's just like, I'm going to do my job and do really, really good at it, and that's all I have to do. That's in some ways that seems very relaxing, but I do like a diverse day as well. So yeah, I think they're both good. You know, if you want to just working in the studio would be better. If you want to manage all of these things and have to do a lot of different things throughout the day, that works for someone like me, you know, a little bit of a hyper brain kind of person. So this is my machine. As I said, this is the Sri Lankan machine. So I've got a few different controls here. The first control is this rotational gear. So I've got a gear here, and this has got 96 different teeth, so this allows me to move the stone around. And then I've got an angle here that I can loosen this, and this will tell me which angle I'm cutting. So different designs need different angles. So I've got a ruby on here. This is a special project that I'm working on right now for a customer. And so what I need to do first for this piece is to cut a flat surface. So on the normal stone, this flat top is going to be the table. So that's usually where I start, doing the table and then making the shape. So I've got a cutting disc on here, and then this is just water. So the water is dripping down onto the disc, and this keeps everything wet. So there's no dust. And so basically I have everything set. My angles and my index are set. And then this is my last control. So I'm going to come down, and I'm just cutting a little bit off the rough surface. And so this is the area that's getting cut right now. So it's becoming flat, and the whole thing will first become flat. So now the whole thing is flat, and I've got to look closely and see how deep do I need to go. So I need to go a little bit deeper because there's still some holes and pits in the area. So we'll go a little bit more. And then once I'm happy with how big that is, so now I'm happy with how flat that is, and I'm just going to show you what it looks like to polish. So to polish, we have to switch. Whoops. So to polish, we have to switch to a different cutting disc. So this one is like a rough cutting. That's where I cut my facets. But then if I want to polish, I have to put a different type of disc on. I'm going to say that again. So if I want to polish, I'm going to put a different type of disc on. Now this one has diamond on it with oil that I've put on there. And so we make our own blend of diamond and oil in here. So notice here, it's flat, but it's matte. It's not shiny. It's not reflecting the light. But once I polish it, we're going to see here just in a few seconds, so I spend a little bit of time and it will start to get shiny pretty quick. So I got to go a little bit more than that. And this is how the light goes into the stone, and this is also how the light gets reflected. But I have to get the whole thing flat first, so we'll just keep going back until it's totally finished. And then once I'm finished with this facet, then I'll change my settings and I'll go to another one and another one and another one, and eventually I'm going to build the whole pattern that either creates the beautiful reflection from the bottom of the stone, or it creates the complex pattern that we see in the crown. So I go one by one, I cut all the facets, and then I go through each of those facets that I cut, and I have to polish each one, and eventually they'll get shiny And then we go from just one facet to having all the facets, and each one of these facets on here, each one of these flat faces, I did them one at a time. I cut them, and then I went back to the same one and polished. So being able to have all of these settings and all of these controls means when I go back to polish, I can easily find the exact same spot, and that enables me to cut all of these different facets and then go back and polish them, and then eventually you end up with, you know, a super shiny, bright, beautiful stone that has a lot of movement and catches your eye, so then you want to buy it.